So welcome to Modern Anti-Semitism on the Spiral. Appreciate you making it out from your bedroom, wherever you are. So who am I? I'm Josh Schlossberg. I was raised conservative Jewish, not particularly religious. Went to Hebrew day school from nursery school to 6th grade. Sorry, I'm actually gonna put my headphones on so I have better audio. I should have done that. I'm gonna start again. I apologize, folks.
Okay, let's try it again. Can people hear my headset?
Yes.
Okay, because that's been an issue with my recording before. I'm really sorry. So let's start it for real. Welcome to Modern Anti-Semitism on the Spiral with me, Josh Schlossberg. I was raised conservative Jewish, not religious. Went to Hebrew day school from nursery school to 6th grade, where half of the day was learning about Jewish studies in Hebrew. Had my bar mitzvah at 13. That's me when I had a lot more hair before my braces. I studied the Holocaust a little bit in college. I've been reading about Judaism ever since. Most recently, I edited something called the Jewish Book of Horror, which is a horror fiction anthology around Jewish culture. And I also just finished writing a Jewish horror novel. So I tapped into my cultural knowledge of Judaism to write some fiction in a popular genre. So anti-Semitism, I'll be honest, up until about 2018, I kind of thought anti-Semitism was not a major problem. Obviously, I knew it's ongoing. Obviously, I know the history. I figured it was just a simmering undercurrent that was hopefully on its way out. Then I'll admit in about 2018, the mass shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue killed 11, 6 injured. That bumped it up a level. I was like, okay, well, I guess this is for real. And still I was like, it's an isolated incident. There are insane people doing insane things all the time. Let's not get too worked up. Then I was following in about 2019, there were scores of beatings of Orthodox Jews in New York City. I was like, well, that's not good. Okay, I'm paying more attention. And then literally it was 2 weeks ago, and it's what caused me to do this presentation. The January 15th hostage situation at the Coleyville, Texas synagogue. It wasn't the event itself. It was the response, or let's just say lack of response to that sort of changed my tune. I believe that, yes, anti-Semitism is still going strong in many ways overtly, but it's the very subtle ways that I think are a bit concerning. And it made me want to do this presentation about these modern versions as I see it. A few examples. This is not exhaustive or anything like that. This is just a few examples through the lens of spiral dynamics, the model of adult psychological development, seeing the world through a different lens. So people might be like, but this is not enough. Of course not. I'm just going to give a broad brush, a few examples here and there. No way is this a complete presentation of everything. And I'm typically not going to be giving the other side of stuff because this is about anti-Semitism, right? So it's hard to prove why somebody commits an act of violence or an intimidation or what's called a hate crime. Like, we don't know what's in the heart of people, but proportionately, based on the incidents classified as hate crimes in the world, it is worth noting that Jews have double the attacks of Muslims and 3 times that of Black people. Now, this is not a contest. This is not to diminish any of the attacks on other groups in any way, shape, or form. I want to make that completely clear. However, this is worth noting. So even if some of these aren't really hate crimes, the reported version, based on the proportion, Jews are at the top there. It's something worth paying attention to, perhaps. And this was 2018. It's probably increased more since 2020, but that's just the information that I have right now. So let's move along to, all right, on the spiral. So here's where things get spicy. So for folks who are paying attention to this presentation, I'm going to guess they have a basic understanding of spiral dynamics. For those who don't, there are plenty of resources. I'll give a very brief description in advance for each of these lenses, but that's it. So the Beige The beige perspective is instinctive, automatic. The slogan, in a sense, would be "I survive." So anti-Semitism at the beige level, what would that look like? Well, folks who are in a beige mindset might be in a life and death survival mode, right? It's something that is pretty rare to occur, but trauma can put you into that. So some anti-Semitism at this stage might include folks who have borne, say, the brunt of the Israeli military. They've been almost killed. They've seen their friends and family die. They have been traumatized. So they're living in bombed out cities. Understandably, they might see Jews as a whole as a threat. Now, obviously, that's an inaccurate statement, but just to understand what that perspective is, you are feeling like, and in some cases, you are in a life and death situation. Who is doing this to you? You're not going to say, well, aspects of the Israeli military, which isn't even supported by a lot of, or you can just kind of be like, it's the Jews, right? And I believe this is a small percentage of folks, but it exists. And if it were to exist on the beige level, I would say that that is where it'd be coming from. People are trying to kill us. I don't like those people. That's beige. Let's move on to purple. So purple is the tribal lens. The idea of "we are safe" is the motto. So from the days of the Bible, the modern day, the Middle East, it's been a land of tribes and therefore tribal warfare. So Sunni, Shia Muslims, Bedouins, Pashtuns, Jews, all of that are different tribes back to time immemorial in the area. Now, to make it very clear, I do not believe that most people living in the Middle East hate Jews. I don't believe that. But the tribal conflicts, particularly over land, such as Israel, obviously that exists to this day in many aspects of the spiral. But I would say there can be a purple anti-Semitism ranging from a resentment of Jews for tribal purposes to vowing not to rest until all Jews are pushed into the sea. So that's a very extreme version. But I would say that that aspect can come from a purple view of the world. And obviously things go all directions, right? The resentments and hatreds and murders go all direction. But to talk about anti-Semitism in particular, I would say that that's the potentially a way of looking at a purple view. Now, I'm going to go a little more in depth for the rest of these because I think they're a little more common. Red. So the red lens is egocentric, exploitive. So the quote that is often used as a motto is "I control." So what would red anti-Semitism be? Well, it would be white supremacists, self-professed neo-Nazis, some of the remaining dregs of the KKK, oddly, but increasingly the anti-vaxxer, anti-masker contingent. Not that everyone who believes that is anti-Semitic, but it's weirdly connected to a lot of anti-Semitism, which I'll get into in a second. I believe that most of these entities, for the most part, most of the time, are fringe and somewhat powerless outside of certain isolated acts, which can be atrocious. So the general concept is that in red, anti-Semitism is you hate Jews because we Jews are a mongrel, inferior race that somehow also has complete power over everyone. So the bankers, media, globalists, whatever you want to call it. So using violence or threats of violence or setting the stage for that violence against Jews can be a form of red anti-Semitism. So let's get into some fun examples here. No, they're not fun. So this is the Anti-Defamation League talking about some of the pandemic deniers. So we have them saying anti-COVID measures, anti-vaccination demonstrations have become the hotbeds of Holocaust trivialization. That's one thing. And anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and tropes across Europe, they say, but obviously across the world and the US. So this is a report from October 2020. So before the vaccines were rolled out. So I would guess the numbers would be much higher at this point, but the report is from Anti-Vaxxers to Anti-Semitism, Conspiracy Theory in the COVID-19 Pandemic, from the Office of Her Majesty's Government, blah, 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 Anti-Semitism. So this is the report that said, government and civil society organizations must also combat the resurgence of anti-Semitism that, as this report evidences, is present in 79% of anti-vaxxer networks. It's just something to note that maybe it's hard to get people into, hey, let's join into like hate this group of people, but you get people in through fears of vaccines or whatever, and then all of a sudden you have all these potential ripe converts for other things. Like, you don't like vaccines? No, I don't. Well, you know who owns all the vaccine companies? It's the Jews. Oh, so that's a nice little gateway for these folks. Let me introduce this next. So as I was posting about this presentation on Facebook into some integral spiral dynamics groups, I had some folks say some things that are now part of my presentation. And I believe that all of that, including what I was just talking about, falls under red. It can be debated. It doesn't really matter. So I was talking to a fellow about stuff. And so he was a fellow who is a reasonable fellow anyway. And I said, yes, I could never figure out how I'm a member of an inferior race that is somehow in control of the world, right? That's kind of my joke. And then our friend William Nolan said, that's because you are either clueless or in denial, is what he said. So I'm clueless and in denial about the fact that I am an inferior race and in control of the world. And I don't know if you can see it, but this post was liked. I'm hiding a part. Let me get out of the way so folks can see. So there's a like there. Somebody liked that in the group. And let's go on to seeing a little more about what this person said. Now, I'm sorry, I am going to subject you to what this person said, because it, I think, is a perfect example of red. And I'm a fiction writer. I swear I did not write this from a fake account. This is so perfect for the purpose of this. It's almost as if I did, but it's better than I would have written. So I'm going to read this to you very quickly. This is what our friend Cam Freeman said. I believe that this Jewish fear of anti-Semitism is actually an expression of collective Jewish guilt. Just as historically, anti-Semitism was always about the problematic tribal behavior of these Chosenites that survived for millennia by refusing to assimilate with their host society. The real terror that hides behind claims of anti-Semitism today is that the fiasco of their subversive behavior over the last century may become public knowledge. The Jewish, Israeli, Zionist role in everything from the entrance of America into both world wars, the JFK, RFK assassinations, the 9/11 false flag psyop, the endless wars in the Middle East, the 2008 financial crisis, the Epstein pedo elite scandal. Acknowledgement of guilt, of course, is very painful, but something needs to change, because attributing the anti-Semitic slur to those who pointed out may have been effective for a while, but it doesn't work anymore. In 2022, being called an anti-Semite is rapidly becoming a synonym for an ethically driven humanist, an anti-racist, a dangerous truth teller, a peace and justice activist. The list of anti-Semites is growing exponentially, probably in direct proportion with the tidal rise in Jewish guilt. The more guilty some Jews feel about their elite's nefarious crimes against humanity, the more the rest of us are becoming anti-Semitic in their eyes. We're almost done here. The quote, unconscious is the discourse of the other, was probably Jacques Lacan's most astute psychoanalytical observation. It is the fear that the other, in this case, the Gentile, the humanist, sees you truly. It is the fear that the goy can detect your shame. Jewish guilt as such is the unbearable fear that the goyim know. So that was pretty beautiful. I think that is a perfect example of this red anti-Semitism. That is pretty fascinating. And then just really quick last quote from this fellow. I know this is a little much, but it's just, I couldn't have come up with better research. The truth is anti-Semitic, but there is no anti-Semitism without Semitism. It simply cannot exist without a division of the world into two groups by a group that sees itself as superior. We're not allowed to talk about this truth. No one dares to say that Jews own Hollywood, control the media, are vastly overrepresented in banking, and dominate the world militarily through their control over American foreign policy, right? No one ever says that. Jews are very happy to brag about their successes, but the idea that the same success is scrutinized by others devastates their entire existence. Well, he found us out, didn't he? Cam Freeman is a true scholar. And then he finished up by posting a video, and I'm not going to play you the video, but I'm going to give you just two very brief quotes to the video that this fellow posted in this integral Facebook group. The quotes are, Adolf Hitler was an organic outgrowth of Jewish behavior. There is not anti-Semitism without Semitism. And then the clincher, Jews created Hitler. Bong. So read in a nutshell. Let's move on from there. Oh, fuck. I think, am I still sharing the screen? Give me a thumbs up if I'm still sharing the screen.
Yes, you're fine.
Okay, I pressed the wrong
Yeah,
button.
you're sharing.
I was so excited. I was so upset by the truth reveal that I pressed the wrong button. Okay.
Thank you for this.
Sure.
This is very uncomfortable to listen to, and I'm glad.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you sticking with me. It'll get a little less uncomfortable. So blue. Okay. So this is not an anti-Christian screed. Don't worry. A Christian belief. Oh, sorry. Blue is the absolutist view. It's the idea we are saved. There can be elements of black and white thinking, it's this or that. Some aspects of fundamentalism. It's also can be the concepts of right and wrong. So that's the blue V meme. So some Christians believe that Jews killed Jesus, who was a Jew himself, remember? So there's that long held resentment based on that belief, right? So that could trickle into a form of anti-Semitism. The belief that Jews are going to hell because they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah, that might not be anti-Semitism, but it's not very nice. It is worth noting that many Christians, particularly the Christian right, are very pro-Israel and very pro-Jewish. So I do want to state that, as are, many Palestinians, many folks across the Middle East. This is not all in one direction, but I'm just focusing on the anti-Semitism. But in terms of this Christian right being in favor of Jews, maybe it's not purely out of love. Maybe it's the belief that Jews must have control of Jerusalem for Jesus to return. Or maybe it's just the idea of having a military base in the Middle East in the form of Israel. Who knows? So that's just my quick foray into blue. See how many more enemies I can make in this presentation. All right, so orange. So orange is the materialist achiever lens. The quote would be, I improve. A very minor version of orange anti-Semitism. I just want to get this out there is, well, some people say Jews are white, some say white passing, but here's the truth. We Jews don't always quite look physically like other, say, Anglos, if you want to put it that way. So despite the fact that Jews control all Hollywood, right, a joke, you won't see a lot of us in the lead film roles or other places where the conventional Anglo look is preferred. So again, this is very minor, but it's just something I wanted to point out there, maybe in terms of this orange view of physicality really focused on looks. Oh, that doesn't quite fit the bill of what we expect in terms of blue eye, blonde hair, whatever. That's not going to be the leading role. Very minor. So a more major orange form of anti-Semitism might be the concept of every man for himself, right? Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can do it. You don't need our help. So the indifference to just plights of any group, say Black people, women, LGBT, Jews, that kind of can happen in orange. It's kind of like, they're all fine. And so that can be kind of a form of anti-Semitism, almost like an accidental anti-Semitism where their worldview does not allow them to have that deeper compassion for groups. And then there's the idea that since all Jews are rich, which is an odd form of anti-Semitism in itself, there's no reason to worry about Jews, right? In the orange lens, money is very important. Oh, Jews are doing fine economically. Let's not worry about that. An example that goes a little bit further in the past, and I sure as hell did not want to get into World War II stuff, but something that I did think worth mentioning is during World War II, the US initially, of course, did not want to get involved with World War II, understandable for some reasons. Not that many Jewish refugees were taken in, and ships were sent back overseas. There's a book called Abandonment of the Jews, which took me a while to recover from because, oh, the US and the Allies were the heroes. It was strange how reluctant they were to do things like, well, bomb the train tracks leading into the concentration camps, right? That's how the Jews were trucked in every day. If they just bombed those railways, they could have stopped the flow of prisoners into the camps. The Allies chose not to do so. So it wasn't like, screw those Jews. It's like, it was, I would say, a form of orange indifference, maybe a form of orange military strategy that didn't actually encompass human life. Who knows? These are just speculations. All right, now we're getting into the real fun stuff, right? So green, sensitive, social, we become, one would think green would be the least anti-Semitic of all the V memes. And I believe that much of green truly is supportive of the Jewish people, genuinely cares. That's where that compassion for, it's called the marginalized groups, comes into play. Where it gets messy is the green concept of intersectionality, which I believe overall is a good thing. So intersectionality is where different identities intersect. So you have race, gender, class, and you kind of just measure all those pieces, right? So that's a green view of intersectionality, but then we do see shades of blue, and this is probably getting a little wonky for those who aren't into spiral dynamics, but some of that blue fundamentalism comes back into play where you're either the oppressed or the oppressor, this or that. Pick a side, you're oppressed or you're an oppressor. And this is where the green anti-Semitism comes into play. So when a group in green that is deemed oppressed somehow then does a harmful act to a group that is deemed an oppressor, green gets sort of short-circuited, and that can lead to a form of anti-Semitism. So I'll explain. So sometimes it's just a blind eye is turned. So when the beatings of the Orthodox Jews in New York City now were unfortunately found to be committed primarily by young Black men. Now, I am not stating in any way, shape, or form that this was an act of anti-Semitism by these young men. It was probably just what young men do, go out there and kind of just like beat up the easy target. So actually, that's what I personally believe was happening. But the difficult fact is that in the green lens, probably rightly so, being a Black man is being deemed you're oppressed, right? In many circumstances, you're oppressed. Jews can be oppressed as well, but in this circumstance, well, who is more oppressed? Probably the Black men. We're going to have to kind of like not talk about this. This is a very inconvenient thing. And the idea of like, oh, well, let's blame Black people for that's crazy. But holding accountable whoever is doing acts of violence is really important. And that falls away through a lot of green. It's like, well, only if it's this group. And I think that's a concern. And then the January 15th, the taking of the hostages at the Colleyville, Texas Jewish synagogue. So right away, and it's changed a little bit later, but the FBI declared was, quote, not specifically related to the Jewish community. That's what the FBI said. Now, I'm not going to get into details of that incident. If you know anything about why the hostage taker was there, you'd know that was kind of silly. So my opinion is that, so FBI, which is an orange, maybe bluish, probably more orange organization, they were kind of pandering to that green/blue intersectionality where Muslims are oppressed, which I'm not going to disagree with that fact. They're more oppressed than Jews. I don't know, maybe let's just say that's the case. So we need to downplay the idea that the Jews, who are the oppressors, right, were in this case the oppressed. It didn't fit the narrative. And so that ended up being the story. And what's interesting is it did change after some public uproar, which why would there have to be public uproar just for the FBI to state something that seems clear? But strangely, it was folks on the right who spoke up mostly about the FBI statement, which then they amended to say, no, actually, it actually was totally about the Jews in this circumstance. So that, I will be honest, is the thing that flipped my alarm switch, not the acts themselves. I think most of these acts are just mentally ill people, frankly. But the like, let's not talk about what's happening there. And I do think that Muslim people are unfairly targeted and have been unfairly targeted by the FBI. And it shouldn't be, look what Muslims are doing. But when somebody does an act and they belong to a group, it doesn't matter what group they belong to. They have to be condemned, those individuals, for their act that they're doing. And somehow in this green intersectionality, it can't happen. And I would say that's a weird form of anti-Semitism. And so just a brief mention of the mouse situation. So the book by Art Spiegelman, a comic book, which is funny enough, about a month ago when I was writing my acknowledgements for, or dedications and acknowledgements for my novel that I finished, I put mouse on there. I put Art Spiegelman because that was what taught me a lot about the Holocaust when I was a young kid. I would read those comic books at my grandmother's house, and it was a really good way to understand as a young man, even a child, what was going on there. So there's this Tennessee school board that has decided to take it out of the curriculum. Now, here's what's interesting. There's been like 1,000 times the coverage of this issue of the Mouse book compared to, say, the Colleyville, Texas stuff or the beatings of the Orthodox Jews. And I have to ask why, because the truth is, I think it's a stupid decision. I think the book should absolutely be taught. There's no evidence that this Tennessee school board hates Jews and they're like, no one could know about this. It's because they're just ignorant. And they basically said it was because there's a naked drawing of a mouse in it. And then there's swear words. I think that probably did upset them. And they didn't have the same level of gravity around the Holocaust that they should have. So I would say that's the majority of that. But this is all over the media in the way those other actual acts of violence were not. And why? I would say because Green has the appropriate enemy in their worldview here. This is some rednecks in Tennessee. So, okay, well, when those are the folks that appear to come after Jews, even though that's not even what's happening, we're going to put this all over the media. We're going to care about this. This is going to be all over my Facebook feed. I think that's a form of virtue signaling. Now, Mouse should be in the schools, and I'm glad people are speaking up about it, but it's like, why does that get people to speak up? But the actual physical violence against Jews is like, I would say it's because of the green lens. Now, I'm going to try to blow through this next part because this is way too broad for this discussion. I am not an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but very briefly to get into this, and folks could feel free to disagree, of course. But so Green is correct when they call out the powerful Israeli military's brutal killing of Palestinians. Now, I think that is always correct to call out killing of people. But somehow Green also gives a pass to Hamas targeting and often succeeding in killing Israeli citizens, killing them, giving a pass for that. And some Greens, even in our Congress, say the US should not fund not the military, but the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome in Israel is the thing that shoots the missiles out of the sky. It's not offense, it's defense. So some, quote, Green folks in our Congress, those who see the world, it seems, through a green lens, have said, let's not fund the defense. Yikes. Is that green anti-Semitism? And then there's the idea of the legitimate green criticism of the Israeli government. Every government should be criticized. I personally believe, as a Jew, that the Israeli government has plenty of criticisms rightfully coming to them. Many Israelis criticize the Israeli government. That is not anti-Semitism. But when it turns into, like our fellow in the screenshot in the slide there says, opposition to things that the Israeli government does turns into opposition of Israel as a whole not having a right to exist. His sign says, end Israel, end the genocide. Well, I guess that's one way to do that. But So a very quick note on Israel. I'm not an expert on this. Who has the ancestral claim stuff? I don't want to get into that. Evidence suggests that prior to 1948, when Israel was made a country, there were Palestinians who were displaced from that land. So the debate about Israel can go on, but something I do want to point out, and this does not justify anything, but is just the reality of how society has gone since time immemorial. Every single scrap of land on the planet has been stolen and taken from another group, whether it's a warring tribe, conquering army. Not advocating for it. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying that is literally everything. Native American tribes did that from African tribes did that from one another. Mongol hordes, whatever you want to call it. Those folks, it was always, now this land is ours. Before that, it belonged to the animals. But anyway, so it's interesting. I'm just noting this, how when it's the Jews who took land, let's say it was taken, right? Let's say it wasn't their rightful thing. I'm not going to have an opinion on that. That's all of a sudden when it's unacceptable. And it might've been because it's so recently, but it's just interesting. So only Jews, the folks who didn't have any homeland because, well, of persecution, as soon as they're taking land, that's when we're drawing the line. Maybe it's just, maybe it's unjust. That's up to you to decide. And yeah, it's so the green obsession with Nazis, which I think sometimes gives like fringe lunatics more power than they have. And sometimes I think green imagines Nazis where they're not. Everyone who's a conservative is not a Nazi. But so the very people that needed a homeland to escape from Nazis, Jews, that's the illegal state. So again, there can be endless debate on this. It's a topic way above my head. I just thought I'd make some observations from my limited understanding of the world. Feel free to correct me. Now we're going to pretty much get close to finishing this up. So, all right, the yellow lens of spiral dynamics. So that's the integrative view. It's almost like the ability to look through all the lenses at once and see which fits in which circumstance, understanding the perspective of others. That is what the so-called integral community and a lot of the folks in the spiral dynamic world it's about. So I would say that there is still forms of anti-Semitism in yellow, and it's less a direct conscious animosity towards Jews than something I've seen a lot in the spiral dynamics integral communities, which particularly amongst those claiming to be in that yellow lens. It's an endless equivocating. It's weighing this point and that point forever to the extent that no actions are taken, no definitive statements are ever made on any circumstance, including a refusal to condemn acts of violence. Just like, well, we have to take all that. It's like, okay, but at a certain point, the captain needs to make a decision about what to do with the sails when the storm is coming in, right? So it's kind of like this yellow above it all, to the point where yellow just looks down condescendingly on all the harm and suffering in the world. It's just part of the spiral. And it's beneath yellow to get yellow hands dirty with this from their pure world of concepts and ideas. So I see that a lot, and I find it a bit troubling. It's like an orange indifference. It's not directly against, say, Jews or any group. It's just, what are we going to do about it? Let's not worry about that stuff. And so that can have real repercussions in the real world. And let me just finish this up with a couple slides. The chat keeps getting in the way of my clicking here. So I posted in a group called PostProgressive about this presentation. So PostProgressive is kind of like an integral offshoot, and folks who claim to be, I'm progressive and green, but I've gone beyond that. And I like to consider myself from the post-progressive view. So I posted about that in the group, and a fellow said, can't I be indifferent to both Semitism and anti-Semitism? And I thought that was the perfect yellow answer. Now, is that anti-Semitism? Call it what you want. It's basically, here's a problem in the world. Aren't I just above this to the point where none of it, I'm not going to weigh in. I was like, wow, you made my point exactly. That's what I find troubling in the communities. Doesn't mean anytime like, oh, there was a criticism of Israel, that is all anti-Semitism. No, that's wise to kind of step back from and to weigh. But even a conversation on the topic, can I just be above it all? I guess you can, sure. Now, remember red fellow William Nolan, the one who said that I'm in denial or clueless about the fact that I'm a member of an inferior race that is in control of the world. Well, in the group, the integral stage where this was posted, I tagged the admin who I know, and I said, great group you got here. I wasn't saying take it down necessarily. I was just like, be aware of this. And then the admin of this yellow group said, Josh, don't blame me or the group for this kind of nonsense. It's nothing this group is about and just came out of the blue. Yet it's still there. The post is still up. That, I think, is this integral idea of like, let's just stay out of it. Hey, let's allow the perspective of that Jews are an inferior race in control of the world, and let's weigh the debates. You know, I'm personally not in favor of censorship in most cases. So I used the analogy before of sometimes I think it's good to let the trash pile up on the side of the road so people can see what a problem it really is. So that's the group's decision as to what to do about it. I'm not going to report them to Facebook as a whole. I kind of like my anti-Semites where I can see them. So I'm glad William Nolan is up there where I can keep track of him. But I thought that was the perfect yellow response. And by perfect, I mean not perfect, to just like, there was no debating, like, just for the record, this is a ridiculous statement that was made. Clearly it's incorrect. We denounce what William Nolan has to say. It wasn't even asking to delete it. There was none of that. Just like, we're yellow and we're above this silliness. So in conclusion, yeah, so I think this indifference does maybe suggest to the world that Jews are not really that supported, perhaps, or to anti-Semites like William Nolan. And I'm going to call him out as an anti-Semite because he's said I'm an inferior race. That counts. It suggests maybe that Jew haters might be onto something. If yellow, these worldly knowledgeable folks in yellow, they can't even refute it. They won't even refute these points. I don't know. So ultimately, in conclusion, elements of the spiral, say elements of beige, purple, red, blue, green, both on the left and both on the right, can be united in aspects of anti-Semitism. It's not always anti-Semitism, but sometimes there is. Then there's that orange and yellow indifference. And I'm more concerned about that, frankly, because that allows the anti-Semitism to not just persist, but to prosper. And frankly, it's as a Jew who is not particularly alarmist about this stuff, right? It is suggesting that, well, so long as we're useful, we Jews are useful, and it's not the groups that are deemed oppressed who are harming Jews, the world has mostly sort of got our backs, right? Like, people will come out about Maus, not about Colleyville. All right. So, but my final question about anti-Semitism is, what happens the moment we Jews, we outlive our usefulness to our supporters on the spiral? What happens then? So that's the end of my presentation, and I appreciate y'all for hanging in there, and let's open it up to discussion.